Spanky is a miniature horse who was rescued when he was 2 years old. He was aggressive to people and to other horses. Dally, a Jack Russell Terrier, was the runt of the litter and an unlikely candidate for the position of best friend for a grumpy miniature horse. But one day during a training session, Dally jumped on Spanky's back, and the rest is history. Spanky the horse had found a friend, and as they spent time together, he became more content. Francesca, their trainer, shared, "When we gave him a friend that didn't judge him and just wanted to be with him, both their lives changed." This unlikely friendship has been featured on National Geographic Wild TV, David Letterman, and they were even the inspiration for a full-length film. In foster care, we get the chance to partner with new people. Sometimes those people feel so different from us that we wonder how we can possibly work together, much less become friends. If Spanky the horse could talk, he'd probably first ask you for a carrot, but then he'd tell you it is possible.
Welcome to the More Than Enough podcast, where we invite some of our friends to help you and some of your friends work together to provide more than enough, filling the biggest gaps for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Here's your host, Jason Weber.
Hey there, welcome to the More Than Enough podcast. I'm joined today by a co-pilot. I've got my friend Micaiah here. Hey Micaiah, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Hey, can you share with our guests how old you are?
I'm 14 years old.
So the reason that we asked Micaiah to join us today is because, as you heard from that opening, we are talking about things that don't seem like they go together, but they really kind of do. And Micaiah is kind of an expert in that. So we wanted to bring him along because Micaiah likes to try things that don't seem like they go together, but do. And so Micaiah, can you share with us the magic combination that you have discovered? When you go to Moe's and you order, what do you get?
I get a chocolate chip cookie and a container of queso.
Okay, so why did you, how did you discover that?
Well, at first, I wanted to gross out my brother.
That's a good reason.
Yeah, and then I tried it, and I thought it was really good, so I kept doing it.
You know, I kind of wonder how many things throughout history have been discovered because people were trying to gross out their brother. I feel like that's probably a thing. We could write a whole book on that.
Yeah.
So the first person to try peanut butter and jelly, right? People were probably like, "Oh, you're so weird," right? But now, that's normal. So someday, perhaps, everybody will eat chocolate chip cookies dipped in queso. Do you think?
Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can hope. Here's hoping. But, today, as you know, Micaiah, we're talking about things that seem like they don't go together, but do. Specifically, we're talking about the relationship between church and state. And for those of us that work and advocate in the foster care system, that's a really important relationship. And sometimes it feels like those are two things that just don't go together very well or very easily. But that doesn't have to be the case. And our very first guest today has a lot of experience in that. Prior to his current role, he served in the White House as a special assistant to George W. Bush, leading the Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, and has lots of experience navigating the world between church and state. And so, Micaiah, can you introduce us to our very first guest?
Here is the president of the Christian Alliance for Orphans, Jedd Medefind.
Right on, man. Well done. All right. Here we go. Let's hear this message from Jedd Medefind.
After a stint with Price Waterhouse in Moscow, I have spent most of my life in government, from the State House in California to the White House. Most of my life, I've also been a part of the local church. And with deep respect for both, I can say this unequivocally. Without the church, foster care is often just a cold system. Without foster care, the church is often just a cold building. Let's unpack that. There are some 400,000 children in the foster system today. They have been removed from their home to protect them from severe neglect or abuse. That helps keep them alive. But to truly thrive, children need more. They need love and nurture and belonging. And these are things that cannot be provided by an assembly line, by a system. They can only be given and received in the context of consistent relationship. One loving home, one individual person at a time. So that leaves us with a vexing dilemma. The 400,000 children in the foster system represent a mass-scale need that defies mass-scale solution. What happens when we try to meet mass-scale needs with a mass-scale solution instead of relationship? Well, what happens is we address surface issues and sometimes even solve them temporarily, but it often makes underlying issues even worse. That is why the statistical future facing children who graduate from foster care is absolute tragedy. By their mid-20s, less than half are employed. Of the men, 64% have been incarcerated as adults, compared to 9% of men overall. More than 2/3 of the women are on public assistance, compared to 7% overall. And that's the future. The present can be almost as bad. Often the system struggles even in its primary role of protection. In a nationwide raid of child trafficking situations last year, the FBI found that 3 out of 5 child sex trafficking victims came from the foster system. A gripping testimony before Congress last year pinpointed the reason why. We will have the privilege of hearing from T. Ortiz Walker Pettigrew later today. T spent her entire childhood in the foster system. For 7 of those years, she was trafficked and exploited. T sums up powerfully what was lacking in the system. After 18 years of care, she had this to say: "The most consistent relationship I ever had while in care was with my pimp and his family." Foster care without the system, without the church, is often just a cold system. But the church without foster care is often just a cold building. Why? Well, the obvious reason is because God that we claim to serve says that these children matter. The Bible describes a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. He sets the lonely in families, and he tells us to do the same. Now, of course, not every family is called to adopt, not every family is called to foster, not everyone is called to mentor or to engage for birth families. But every Christian community is called to live the pure religion that James describes as caring for orphans and widows in their distress. A church that fails to do that obscures God's heart. It neglects his call. It operates more like a building than a body, like a system itself. A church like that is likely to have only facade community, feeble theology, and flavorless witness to the world. But the opposite is true as well. When a church engages foster care together, vibrantly, wholeheartedly, we see a building become a living body. We see community growing deeper. We see theology growing richer. We see the witness growing more vibrant. Opening heart and home to precious, hurting children is not easy. So every member of the church is needed. It's not just about the families that are adopting or fostering or mentoring or serving birth families. Every single individual is needed. I think of a woman in my home church, Lorraine Withers, who did the shopping for my family, all the groceries for more than a year after we brought our daughter home. I think of an orthodontist and a mechanic and a hairdresser and a lawyer who provide their services free to families who are caring for kids that came from foster care. I think of a friend who had 2 African-American children placed with his Caucasian family unexpectedly. That afternoon, the pastor's wife, an African-American herself, showed up at their door with a basket full of products, and she gave them a 3-hour crash course in African-American skin care and hair care. Along this journey, a church community gets to know not only each other's hearts more deeply, but God's heart. That's theology. There may be no more dramatic claim in all the world's religious literature than what we find in Deuteronomy. In chapter 10, verse 17, it says this, "For the Lord our God is God of God and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome." And yet the very next verse says this, "He defends the cause of the fatherless." The most powerful being in all the universe cares deeply and personally for the most vulnerable beings on our planet. That tells us so much about him, about his love for vulnerable children, his love for each of us, and it points us ultimately to the gospel. As a church grasps this and begins to live it out together, it bears vibrant testimony to a watching world. I love a story that ran in the Oregonian last year. It was titled, "A Revolution in Oregon's Foster Care System." Now, this is considered the least religious area of America. And yet the article described how 60-some churches have come together to serve not only the children in the foster system, but their families and the weary social workers who are caring for these people every day. It even described how they have repainted and renovated all 8 of the child welfare offices in the region. And the article quoted a 20-year veteran of the system saying this, "It means the world to me to feel that we are in this together. I can't say it enough. I'm moved to tears often." My friend Esther was moved also. When she was 9, her father left the family. A few years later, a stepfather left as well. And eventually her mother abandoned her as well. But a family in a local church that she had visited from time to time, the Ellises, embraced her as their own and invited her to live with them. And she did, and they loved her consistently year after year. And Esther is now in her 20s, just an amazing young woman, and she still considers the Ellises home for the holidays. And this is what gets me. She had attended church on and off her whole life. And yet this was what she had to say. "All my life, I had heard about God's love, about God as my Father. But I don't think I ever really believed it until I experienced it through the Ellises." Without a heart of foster care, the church can be just a cold building. And without the church, the foster care system can only be a system. But when foster care engages the church well, it can become a place of healing and new life. And when the church engages foster care well, it too can become a place of healing and new life, not only for those who are being served, but also for those who are serving, and for a watching world as well.
Without the church, foster care is often just a cold system. And without foster care, the church is often just a cold building. So good. Well, here in a minute, we're going to talk to somebody who has a lot of experience navigating the relationship between church and state. And she's done it from both sides of that equation. We'll talk to Dr. Sharen Ford right after this. Okay, so you're all in on working with others to provide more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. But, and I know I'm being Captain Obvious here, foster care feels like a puzzle, and it feels a little overwhelming to get started. And because it feels like a puzzle, you feel like you need the box top. Like, what are we even aiming at? You want a picture that provides a vision of what the puzzle will look like when it's complete, what more than enough will look like in your community. So that vision provides a unifying goal across churches, organizations, agencies, and advocates where you live, helping drive community engagement and collaboration. But we know you're busy and you need an easy way of sharing the box top with others. That's why we created the More Than Enough Vision Starter Guide. The Vision Starter Guide is free, like $0, and includes communications resources like a worksheet to help you customize the vision for your community. There's an example elevator pitch and slide deck, and easily customizable language for social media posts or your website. Let us help you multiply the impact of your time, your effort, and your resources by equipping you to communicate the vision you have where you live. Just go to the show notes for this episode at morethanenoughpodcast.org. That's morethanenoughpodcast.org. From there, follow the link to access the starter guide and get the box top to the foster care puzzle where you live. All right, let's get back to the podcast. Welcome back. Dr. Sharen Ford has been working on behalf of children and families for well over 3 decades. Much of that time was spent as an administrator for the state of Colorado. And so she brings an incredibly rich perspective in terms of what kinds of things go through the minds of those working at the state when it comes to the faith community, and the incredible value that comes when the church works together with the state. And so today, Dr. Ford's going to talk with us about the magic that can happen when the church shows up alongside government agencies and administrators, and when we work as partners to provide more than enough for children and families. Here's Dr. Sharen Ford. Dr. Ford, one of the things that's really intimidating for folks in the faith community and the church can be thinking about working with the state, working with the government, working with state child welfare administrators. It can be intimidating and it can be hard because I think sometimes those of us in the faith community, we don't understand, like, why are you doing things that way? Why are you making decisions the way that you're making them? You, having been in public child welfare for decades, can you take us behind the curtain and into the mind of a child welfare administrator?
I think one of the things that child welfare administrators think about, and you have to understand that every state is configured a little bit differently. And so you have an administrator who is probably looking at the broad stroke picture of many aspects of child welfare versus the individual worker who is looking at their piece of the responsibility. Someone who's an intake worker is doing that upfront investigation work, looking at, can I leave the child in the home safely? Listening to the referrals that come in. And, okay, is this referral a credible referral? Is there concern here that I need to take action? And is that action something that I need to take immediately? Is there an immediate safety issue? Is it, okay, I can go in 2 days and it's okay? Or it's an older child and it's just parent-child conflict and I can wait a little bit and we can just talk on the phone. And so it depends on what the situation is. And so that upfront worker has one level of responsibility, whereas that supervisor who's supervising that intake worker is helping to coach and mentor them and helping them to pick up on cues that says, yes, this is an immediate issue. We need to respond now. So that intake worker has a very specific job that they're having to do. That supervisor in coaching and mentoring that worker about how to do their job appropriately. And then the administrator who's saying, okay, I want to make sure that that worker has everything that they need and they're equipped to do their job.
Yeah. When you talk about that, you talk about that at sort of the caseworker level, and then you talk about the supervisor level, and then another level that the supervisors and county and state workers work at is sort of the process level, like how we do trainings and how we conduct those things. How do we do orientation meetings and how do we do certification of foster parents and all of those things as well. And I think one of the things that is a hallmark of foster care movement in local communities is there comes a point when a group of partners working together, churches working together, and other agencies and organizations working together with government come to the conclusion that maybe there's some processes that need to change. Maybe there's some things that we could do more efficiently that need to change. Now, you might not be the right person to ask this because I know firsthand that when you were approached with the possibility of needing to change up and be open to working with churches in the state of Colorado many years ago, the lieutenant governor gave you that charge. You didn't hesitate. You were all over it, and you made a huge difference for kids. But what would cause an administrator at the state level to be hesitant to make changes? What are some of the risks that they're trying to evaluate in their head when we start talking about changing processes that have been that way for a long time?
I think that any administrator wants to be open to change because life changes, situations change. And that if we're not open and receptive, that just because you did it the old way doesn't make it the right way to do it today. Being responsible to the community, responsible to children, means being able to hear other people's opinions and value them, value their input, and looking at yourself and saying, you know what, I need to take myself out of it and step back and say, okay, what do I need to do to embrace the information that's coming to me with an open and receptive mind for the good of communities, for the good of families and children? Then you don't know everything. But boy, when other people who are like-minded, who have good intentions, can sit around the table, and even the people who are the naysayers and who don't think like you, who want to stir up the pot, you bring them in and you have them sit at the table with you, and let's talk about this and see where it can go. It's an opportunity for change, and all change isn't bad. I wanted to say one other thing about administrators. You know, administrators receive a lot of input from communities, and some of it feels like hate mail coming in, what people see going on in the news, or what they heard from a neighbor. And so some administrators have a shield up. And so it's important for the faith community and other community partners to know that it's not that they're not welcome at the table. It is sometimes about how you come to the table, how you bring information to the administration, so that there is an opportunity for courageous dialogue. And that dialogue is critical for change to occur.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I agree with you that it is so key that we come into this in the right way, right? It's not just about doing the right things. It's about doing the right things in the right way. And so when you think about what is the right way to come to a state administrator, can you give an example of where you've seen somebody do that well and what it looks like?
I have seen occasions when it has come from a top down, where a group has approached the executive director of the department, and the executive director has given an assignment to that administrator to follow up with the group. That happens all the time in state government. And it's that group didn't know about that administrator, maybe didn't know how to reach them, even though their number's listed. Getting to that political head sometimes is easier because there's a method to be able to do that. And so that's one way, and it works. Another way is if someone knows that administrator, reaching out to them directly really is actually more engaging in some ways, because there's not the pressure of you having to report back up about what happened. You're able to sit down and have that dialogue one-on-one or with a small group, and then begin to share that information that you've received back with the administration about, here's an opportunity. Let me share with you what I've learned and where we could go with this. And I think that is a win-win, one for the community, two for that administrator, and then also for the agency, because being able for the administrator to say, here's a proposal that the community has brought, and here's some possibilities of what change could look like. And we've done some of the legwork without the pressure of time. Because usually in state government, when you're giving an assignment, sometimes you have 10 days to respond. There's only so much you can find out in 10 days, okay? And that non-threatening way of getting that information, beginning that relation, because it also allows opportunity for relationship building. And I can't tell you how important it is for that administrator to build relationships, collaborative partners, and then that they come together to present something, and it's not a top-down kind of issue.
Yeah, that's so good. You know, what we say all the time is organizations don't collaborate, people do. And apart from relationship, you really don't have partnership. And so what you're saying is you have to approach that administrator as a person, not as a cog in the political or bureaucratic landscape of everything. And if you hit this lever at the top, it's going to trigger this lever down lower and make this cog go the direction you want it to go. No. We're talking about people. We're talking about relationships. And you're saying go directly to those that can help get things changed. I love that. So, Dr. Ford, we use the phrase more than enough. And when we say more than enough, we mean more than enough foster families for every child to have an ideal placement, more than enough adoptive families for those waiting for one, more than enough help for biological families trying to stay together and get back together, and more than enough support for all these families. And when we use that phrase, more than enough, I think it sometimes comes across to people as, well, that's a nice slogan. It makes a good bumper sticker, right? But I know you and I consider you a friend, and I know both of us believe this is not a bumper sticker. It's not a catchy slogan. It's something we believe is possible. And I'd like for you to share with us why you think more than enough is possible in every community in this country. And what do you think that will look like when we get to that point? What does that actually look like to have more than enough?
You know, Jason, I do believe in more than enough. I was looking at some notes the other day as I was sheltering in and was doing some cleaning out of, a couple of closets. And I found this presentation that I had done. And I remember opening the presentation with, I had a dream. And I had a dream that there would be more than enough foster families so that every child in that foster home got the attention that they needed. That foster parent had only one worker to deal with because they only had one group of kids in their home, or that child or kid, sibling group, so that only one worker was interacting with that foster family. I had a dream that foster parents had the training that they need to meet the needs of the child and had the right supports. And when you have more than enough, it's not just more than enough foster families. It is more than enough supports for that foster family to be successful. It's more than enough supports for that child in that home to get what they need while they're in that home, sometimes from the foster parent, sometimes from collateral resources. And so all of that's possible because everything doesn't have to come from government. I think that more than enough is possible because foster families don't come from government. Foster families come from communities, and churches are the biggest community that I know of. And so when I think about there being more than enough foster families in every community across this nation, it's because there are churches whose church leadership speak to the need of the family. Every family has a heart in the church for God, doing the things that God has asked them to do, to care for the least of these, that He sets the lonely in families. The church is a family. So if God wants every child to be in a family, He would reach out to the church family to be a part of that answer for that. So if every church and every community said, okay, I want our church to step forward on behalf of the kids in our community who have a need, and we're going to meet that need. So there's going to be more than enough. And so for every family who steps forward out of that church, the church would also say, oh, okay, well, we don't want you to be in that by yourself, so we're going to support you. So that family fostering would have the families on the pew behind them, on the pew in front of them, on the pew to the right, or online, virtually nowadays, that they would have those families who would say, gosh, the five of us, our five families, are going to support you. So you have more than enough support. I think that can only happen with people really understanding and embracing that God has called the church to be the place of hospitality and the place that's a first aid station. And so it's a first aid station for that child. It's a place of hospitality for that child. It's God using that foster family to say, I've opened my heart and I've opened my home to give, to meet a need. And I know that that is possible in this era of my lifetime. All the bride of Christ has to do is say, yes, we'll lead into this space and we'll help do the recruitment that government is required to do, but the church has the opportunity to do.
Dr. Ford has had such a tremendous impact on so many of us in this space, and I'm so thankful for her and her friendship and just her example to all of us working on behalf of children and families. If you want to know more about what Focus on the Family is doing to equip and recruit adoptive and foster families, you can visit waitnomore.org. That's waitnomore.org. All right. Well, here in a minute, we're going to talk to somebody who was in foster care and who has her own experience with the church. And she's going to talk about that impact on her own life. So stick around for our conversation with Helen Parks right after this. Hey gang, we're going to get back to things here in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted you to know that you can find the show notes for this episode by going to morethanenoughpodcast.org. There's some more information about our guests there, and we have some resources that can help you take your next steps to bring people together in your community to provide more than enough for children and families. And one last thing, at the top of the show notes, there are some buttons that allow you to choose where you normally listen to your podcasts, and you can leave a review for the More Than Enough podcast right there. We would be super grateful if you'd be willing to take the time to do that. Reviews help us to know what we're getting right and how we can give you more of the same in the future. Again, all of this is at morethanenoughpodcast.org. All right, let's get back to things. All right, well, it's time to shut things down for today with our final guest, Helen Parks, who worked for many years with Dr. Ford at Focus on the Family. Helen was in foster care until she was 7. She went into kinship care and was in kinship care until 18 when she went off to university and now spends her life advocating for the kids that are in the circumstances that she was in. To close us out today, she looks back at her own story and shares with me and you the moments when the church and the Lord's love and presence was evident in her life. Here's Helen Parks. Helen, was there ever a time that you remember when the church became a place of hospitality for you? It may not have been as early as you would have wanted. It may not have been when you needed it most. I don't know. But do you remember a time when the church did step into that role in your life?
Yes, there's very distinct times when the church and the Lord became evident even before I knew or understood who and what they were. When I was with my grandmother as a young elementary student, she was a wonderful woman, cared for me in ways that I'd never been cared for, but was very prim and proper, and religion was not her thing. But one day there was a knock on the front door, and the woman in our neighborhood, who was the daughter of a pastor, was going around and inviting people to church. And my grandmother said, well, I'm not going to go, but if you come pick up my granddaughter, she can go. Now I look back and see, yeah, free childcare. Get rid of me for a couple nights a week. Or, yeah, I can see that. But for me, I had never heard of God or Jesus or these stories, learned about having dinner together as a church on Wednesday night, or worshiping and doing children's Christmas programs. This was such an exciting, welcoming place that I had for a couple of years. And then when I moved into my middle school years and was with a different relative, which was not a safe or happy place, there was a lot of abuse happening. They wanted their own biological daughter to go to church, but didn't want her to be alone. So they again, hey, we'll send Helen along to be an extra babysitter in the classroom, because it was a smaller church in the country. And so all the kids were together. And so as a middle school in these prime years of who am I, what's going on, and added on to my own personal trauma, there were these lovely church ladies leading Sunday school every morning, giving me messages that Jesus loves me, God has made me, He is there for me. And these were just crucial times in my life that God spoke up and was there. And so when I came to know the Lord at 24 and truly could see and look back, and someone was teaching me about, this is what your testimony is. Can you look back and see where God was? There was times when people can talk about, they felt the hand of God around them, where I could see it. Like, it makes no sense why my grandmother would open the door to a strange woman. Well, it was the 80s, so it's a little different, but would open the door to a woman and let her take me to church, or that my aunt and uncle's plan to send me to get me out of the house and kind of as a punishment was actually the Lord stepping in and giving me healing and love through the church community.
That's beautiful. And it's a beautiful place to conclude our conversation, because what you both have pointed out is that at the end of the day, we can get caught up in recruitment and strategies about providing adoptive and foster families. But at the end of the day, this is about welcoming the hurting in and providing a safe place, a hospitable place to children and families. And I'm so grateful for the work that both of you do to make that happen, to see that happen in communities around the country. So thanks so much for spending the time with us, and thanks for what you do. Thank you so much, Helen. Well, what is the value of putting things together that don't go together? Why even bother? Why go to the trouble? Well, this is the why, because it results in children being cared for and loved well. Well, that's going to close us out for today. I want to thank all of our guests, as well as our producer, Amanda Baird, who likes banana and mayonnaise sandwiches, truly horrifying, and our audio engineer, Daniel Davidson, who thinks everything is better with Hatch green chili on it. All right, and thank you to all of you who are working so diligently to put things together that don't seem like they go together, so that children and families can be cared for well, until there's more than enough.
This has been the More Than Enough podcast. Join us next time as we introduce you to more of our friends who are passionate about helping you and your friends work together to provide more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Explore show notes and learn more at morethanenoughpodcast.org.